Committee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. This is the first in a series of public hearings the committee will be holding as part of the House's impeachment inquiry.
This is Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dumbcast family of podcasts. Today is Wednesday, November 13th, 2019, and as you just heard, today the House Intelligence Committee held its first public hearing in the impeachment inquiry. So today you get a rare, just Kelly and Sophy episode discussing this historic occasion. Hey everyone, this is Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm Kelly and I'm on with Sophy. Hey Sophy.
Hey Kelly.
And today we have no guest except the impeachment hearings. The impeachment hearings are our guest. So we've decided that we should mark this historic occasion of the impeachment going public for the first time today and just talk a little bit about it, what happened, and, just get a sense for where we are and let the history kind of wash over us. But before we do that, there's one other historic thing that's happening that I want to make sure that we mention and don't forget about, and that is the Equal Rights Amendment. So we've mentioned the Equal Rights Amendment on this podcast before, but at some point we'll probably do a full episode. It was first passed by the House and Senate in 1972, so before Sophy or I were born, and a bunch of states approved it, saying that they would like it to go into the Constitution, but it was down by just a few states. Illinois ratified it recently, and now with Virginia flipping blue, it is extremely likely that early in what year are we going into? 2020? Early in 2020, Virginia will probably ratify it. So then the other thing that has to happen is that there was a deadline put on it, and we are well past the deadline at this point. So Congress has to change the deadline, which was, I believe, 1982. It's already been changed once. So we have to change the deadline again. And today, the House, the people in the House that were not part of the impeachment hearings, in the Judiciary Committee, actually passed a resolution saying that the deadline should be eliminated for ratifying the ERA. So that's a really big step. It's only the Judiciary Committee so far. The full House would need to vote for it, and I assume they would. I don't know why that wouldn't pass in the full House, but then, of course, it would also need to go to the Senate. It has been introduced in the Senate, and we will see what happens there. Mm-hmm. Don't hold your breath, but Equal Rights Amendment, many, many, many years later, could finally get some movement.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing, and it's really important, and it's really needed, and it's ridiculous that we don't have it yet. So watch for, at some point in the near future, an actual full episode on Equal Rights Amendment and what it would mean. But for now, let's get back to impeachment. So impeachment went public.
Woo!
I wonder how much of the country watches. I mean, I know I was super invested in what was happening. It felt like a lot of people I knew were, but I don't know. Do you think people actually watch?
I think that it being on the sort of big three networks made a lot of people watch. Because previously, when I've watched congressional testimonies or hearings, it's been mostly just carried on C-SPAN and PBS. And today's hearings were on NBC and CBS. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, that's what my mom always watched, which she watched soap operas. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of people were probably annoyed that they missed their soap operas, but saw the impeachment hearings instead. So I'm hoping that means that I got that from people that are not within sort of normal political activist sphere who were saying, hey, should I be paying attention to this impeachment thing? So it's breaking through something.
All right, well, that's good. I don't know if I know anybody who's not in the political sphere anymore, so my regular people radar isn't very strong. But that's, I mean, I hope people are watching. Whether people are understanding any of it is, of course, a totally different question. It's pretty in the weeds most of the time. And, starting off with a 20-page opening statement by Bill Taylor, while incredibly well done and interesting, might be a lot for someone to wrap their head around. But hopefully they're paying some attention. I think even Fox News played parts of it. If you are listening to this and you did not watch the hearings and you still want to, C-SPAN keeps an archive of all of this, and you can just go to cspan.com.org, and you can either watch the full however many hours it was, or you can watch clips. You can make your own clips on C-SPAN, which is a fun little trick you can do on C-SPAN. Pick the 1 minute that you want to share and make a clip of it. So there are definitely parts that are worth watching. All right, so the big question, of course, is sort of what happened, and so what happened? Did we learn anything new? And what do we think it all means? So the sort of bare bones what happened today is that 2 people testified, and those people were Bill Taylor and George Kent. They have both testified before in closed-door hearings, so this was just them in public hearings. And there will be one more person so far that's been called, and that's Marie Yovanovitch, who will be on Friday. I don't know why they spread it out. I don't know why no Thursday, but that's probably good for all of us to, get back and do some stuff in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill Taylor is the U.S. Charge d'Affaires for Ukraine, the acting ambassador in Ukraine, and George Kent is the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the State Department's European and Eurasian Affairs Bureau. Okay, so these are pretty important roles. So why do you think it was these 2 people that the House committee called? What do you think they were? What are we sort of trying to get at in these hearings?
I think they were called first because they are both career diplomats who served under multiple presidents. I'm pretty sure Bill Taylor said in his testimony that he'd served under 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So they aren't necessarily out when the president changes out. They sort of stay in the foreign service this whole time. And so I think they were sort of not only uniquely placed because they have experience with Ukraine and they could speak to the situation in Ukraine and sort of why Ukraine might have needed the funding that we were providing, why they might have been willing to do whatever they needed to do to get that funding, but also because they are not sort of like very partisan. It's clear that they felt that the president had done something wrong and they were testifying sort of to that effect, but they were not Democratic operatives or Republican operatives. They were sort of as close to nonpartisan as you can kind of get in that environment. So I think that's probably why they were up first. As in terms of did we learn anything? There was some new news. So Bill Taylor advised that a staffer, one of his staffers, overheard. I think it was Ambassador Sondland and the president talking about via phone about the quid pro quo. And I think we have a clip of that. Can we play that?
Yes.
Last Friday, a member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th. While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff, at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information. I'm including it here for completeness.
Yeah, so what is striking to me about this, there's a lot of things about this, of course. I mean, it's new information, so that's one thing. But what else is striking is they talk on cell phones in public restaurants. Like, what? You know, the whole, like, but her emails thing. Like, I thought the Republicans were supposed to be the ones who really cared about, you know, state secrecy and whatever. Like, oh my gosh, what are you doing here? This isn't news. Right? Like, we know that Trump and his whole sphere are just not very security conscious, but it is appalling that this kind of stuff, and like the speaker on the phone is loud enough that somebody else at the table can overhear the other side of the conversation. Like, this is just mind-boggling.
I mean, Rudy Giuliani did butt dial the press recently and then confess crimes on the phone. So
true. Perhaps we should not be surprised by this. But I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that, like, this is not normal. This is not okay. And Republicans, I don't understand why they think it's okay. Like, not the Trump and his cronies who don't know what they're doing, but like Republicans who are in Congress and the Senate who would be blowing a gasket if a Democrat did this. Like, why is this okay? I mean, you know, that's the $1 million question, but why is this okay? I do want to go back to one thing you said earlier, which was that that Taylor and Kent are career professionals. You know, they're appointed, not elected. You know, they're sort of sober people. Stephanie Grisham, who is the White House press secretary, apparently said today that this is, let's see, how did she say this? Oh, she didn't say it today. It was a while ago. But she said that it was part of a, quote, coordinated smear campaign. And she described Bill Taylor as a radical unelected bureaucrat. Okay, having listened to Bill Taylor just in this clip you just heard, or if you listen to more of it, how does anyone describe him as radical?
How does anybody who knows Rudy Giuliani describe Bill Taylor as a radical unelected bureaucrat? Like, what?
Yes. I mean, if you want unelected bureaucrats, like, what's Ivanka doing? Or... yeah, but yeah, radical. Like, so my dad is one of the most, like, straight-laced people you will ever meet in your life. And by comparison to Bill Taylor, my dad looks like a party animal. Like, Bill Taylor, I can't imagine anyone less radical seeming than this guy. So, yes, in general, Republicans, crazy smear talking points. Okay. So Taylor gave this long testimony, or this long opening statement, and then answered a bunch of questions. The only real new piece of information that we didn't know, mostly because everything else has leaked already, is this phone call. This phone call, I think, is really damning. Whether or not Republicans will see it that way is a totally different question, but it feels really damning to me. I assume, and it seemed like the assumption of what Bill Taylor believes, is that the House is following up on this, and hopefully the staffer will also come and testify and will say the same thing, and will help cement that argument. There's an open question, right? Does anything actually move the needle with Republicans? You know, we had Lindsey Graham saying a few weeks ago, a month ago, whatever it was now, saying like, well, if there's actually proof of this, then we definitely need to remove him. And then, like, there's proof. And he's like, well, I'm just not going to read it. So does anything make a difference? I
think it's important to remember that Trump was elected, like most presidents, because of a coalition. And that coalition was the group that we think of as his base, right? The sort of rabid Trump fans who love him no matter what, people who would love him if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue. And then they also sort of needed the votes of the reluctant Trump voters, right? The people who are lifelong Republicans, who are super conservatives, who don't like Trump, who don't like sort of the blustery, sort of gross edge to Trump, but who voted for him anyway because they were thinking, hey, lower taxes and conservative values will get advanced. And so those are the people people, I think, that are up for grabs right now, that second group. We all know that his base will never abandon him, but his base is a much smaller subset of the people who elected him and the people who opposed removal from office. And so that group of people who are in the coalition, if they leave the coalition, not only is Trump not going to get reelected, but then you're going to start to see some movement from Republicans and even maybe Senate Republicans. So I think that's the group that we're needing to reach. And I think you could that's sort of on display today from the Democrats. And what I thought was really interesting was it was clear that the Republicans' points didn't make any sense to you. Watch Fox News all the time and frequent conspiracy theory websites. And so to me, that indicated that they are even potentially concerned about losing that base, that they need to shore up that kind of support, the support of the diehard Trump for the red hats and watch Fox News every day. And so if they're worried about that base, if they're still trying to appeal to that, then things cannot be looking particularly good for them.
Yeah, I mean, again, it all sort of comes down to what people actually see or hear or get out of this. Like, if the headlines all end up being like, Democrats tried this and Republicans refuted it, then that doesn't do anything to move the needle, because a fair amount of the population is only going to read the headlines. But if the headlines are like, damning new information about phone call in restaurant, then people are like, oh, they're finding out more stuff in this impeachment, and that could move people. I mean, I think the problem with parts of the coalition that are not diehard is that they're also often, not always, but often low information voters. And so you've got the sort of intellectual anti-Trump people that are part of the Republican base who maybe voted for Trump in 2016, but certainly wouldn't again. But you don't need to get them. They already have left the Trump party. The people you need to get are probably people who just don't pay that much attention. And so those are the people.
Yeah, I agree.
The media reaction to this is going to be really important. The media reaction, but also the social media reaction. Like, what are people like us? Maybe not me, because I only interact with other Democrats on social media. But if you out there listening have friends and family who you're still Facebook friends with, who are, maybe centrist, moderate kind of people who may be flippable, or who are very conservative, but could maybe not like Trump and corruption, then it's important that we think about how we present this information.
Well, I think a good point I've seen by a couple of pundits is that historically we've seen the effect of hearing cumulative. And so I think that's one of the reasons they're having everybody spread out. Maria Ivanovich isn't going until Friday, and then there'll be more hearings next week. I think that's sort of part of the effect, is if all you see all day, every day is, today there was explosive news from the impeachment hearing. Here's another impeachment hearing with more damning evidence. Then sort of that sort of cumulative effect sort of makes its way into everybody's consciousness. You're not like people like you and I who are paying very, very close attention to every single detail of the hearings.
Okay. All right. So what else do we want to make sure we talk about? One thing I will just say is I really liked the new format of like 45 minutes for the Democrats, and that actually Schiff just turned it over to a staffer for most of the time, a staffer who's a former prosecutor, which was a very smart move. And then the Republicans had 45 minutes. Instead of this like 5 minute, it just really let them sort of pull out more details and ask follow-up questions. And it was staffers who weren't necessarily trying to score political points. And it was just way better, I thought, at getting information across. And I could actually listen to the whole thing, even when it was the Republican asking the questions. I didn't like him, but at least I could listen to him. Although he did seem extremely unhappy and uncomfortable being there, which was a weird choice.
He
but
he did.
But then they moved back to the like 5 minute. And every time Jim Jordan opens his mouth, I have to just mute. I cannot listen to that man.
I know.
I feel like it's people like him that I don't understand how they can be offering the justification they can and what their end game is. So, like, I understand low information people who just don't know that much about what's going on, have heard some talking points and just repeat it. Like, I get. I get the people who are just like completely corrupt. I don't get these people who have been in politics for a long time and are like willing to sell their souls to just outright lie to try to prove points that make no sense. I like, what is the end game? Where do you end up? How do you?
I don't know what the end game is, and I think the Republicans don't know what the end game is either. From what I've been reading of, and it's always hard when you're working with unnamed sources. But from what I've been reading in political news, there are a number of Republican operatives who were blindsided sort of by the release of the call summary by the White House. They had not expected it to be so damning, and still have not quite gotten together. They've tried a couple of different tacks to attack the impeachment inquiry, and they've sort of been thwarted at every turn. First, they're like, oh, well, this is a secret inquiry, and we need to participate, and that fell apart really fast. And then they were trying to attack the whistleblower, but nobody really cared that much. And so now they're sort of, and then they floated the trial balloon. Well, Trump did it, but it doesn't matter, right? And that went very poorly for them. So now I think they've shifted to the message of this is all hearsay. And it's a strange message because we're going to hear from more people soon. And from what I see on the schedule, people who did hear directly from the president or from Sondland that this was coming from the president. So either they are flailing and they are just trying to buy time, or they are trying to set themselves up to potentially be shocked and saddened by the information that they learn later on, and be able to, like Mitt Romney always does, express concern. Not necessarily doing anything about it, but then be able to say, oh, well, I stood up for the president because I'm innocent. I didn't know all of this information. That's the only way I see that strategy making sense, is if that's their end game or if they have no end game.
Yeah, well, I think they have no end game. I hope. All right, so I think that is probably enough for us to dwell on today. But, please, people, ask us questions on Twitter, Facebook. We probably won't know the answers, but we will probably know people who do or can help you find them. Maybe we'll know the answers. I shouldn't speak for you. Generally, with this stuff, I don't right off know the answer, but I can find the sources and figure out the answers. But we're happy to help figure that stuff out. And so this is just, of course, phase 1 of impeachment, which is in the House. The House is doing these hearings. It's now in the public phase. If the House, I forget the exact terminology, but if the House votes on articles of impeachment, there would be laid out articles. And if they said, yes, it should go forward, it would go to the Senate. And the Senate is where the trial would actually be. So this is kind of like a grand jury type situation. And then it would go to an actual trial, a sham trial, certainly in the Senate, given the current makeup of the Senate. But a trial, nonetheless, that is where that would happen.
Although the best part about the Senate trial is that they would have to be silent. The senators are not allowed to talk, from what I understand.
Yeah, that does sound really nice. We'll see what happens. I think I read a headline. I didn't investigate further yet, but something about the Senate Republicans have just realized that if they have a lengthy trial and all the Democrats who are running for president, who are senators, need to come back for it, that could really disrupt the Democratic primary. I'm not sure that that's the maybe, but I think if we have a lengthy public trial and the president is thrown out, then it's going to be bad for the Republicans. So that's probably not their
I think
best
there's
move.
also a potential upside for them. I think people might also realize when they're, it might be good for some of the candidates to be seen as, any serious government things. That just reminds people that they're presidential. So, there's a potential upside for senators who'd have to come back in.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I think we will leave it there. And I'm going to close this out with a clip of the end of George Kent's opening statement, where he gave what I found to be a very moving statement about immigration and people who choose to come to this country and serve this country. It was the only moment today that I cried. I didn't cry a lot, but I cried a little bit. I found it very moving. And of course, it's from your boyfriend, George Kent. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
I would like to conclude my opening remarks with an observation about some of my fellow public servants who have come under personal attacks: Ambassador Yovanovitch, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and Dr. Hill, at least one of whom is going to appear before this body in the coming days. Masha, Alex, and Fiona were born abroad before their families or they themselves personally chose to immigrate to the United States. They all made the professional choice to serve the United States as public officials, helping shape our national security policy towards Russia in particular, and we and our national security are the better for it. In this sense, they are the 21st century heirs of two giants of 20th century U.S. national security policy who also were born abroad: my former professor Zbigniew Brzezinski and his fellow immigrant Henry Kissinger. Like the Brzezinskis and Kissingers, the Yovanovitches and Vindmans fled Nazi and communist oppression to contribute to a stronger, more secure America. That honorable tradition of transatlantic ties goes back to the very founding of our republic. Our 18th century independence would not have been secured without the choice of European officers, the French-born Lafayette and Rochambeau, the German-born von Steuben, and the Poles Pulaski and Kosciuszko, to come to the New World and fight for our cause of freedom and the birth of a new country free from imperial dominion. It is my privilege to sit next to my former boss, Ambassador Taylor, today, and it is my honor to serve with all of these patriotic Americans. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.